Welcome to The Authority File, the academic library podcast from Choice. Choice is a publishing division of the ACRL and the publisher of Choice Reviews and CC Advisor. This episode is brought to you by the University of Chicago Press. I'm Bill Mickey, the host of the podcast and the editorial director at Choice, and for this 4-episode series, my guest and I discuss the inner workings of two storied institutions in the academic publishing and library worlds, the Chicago Manual of Style and the Library of Congress's Publishing Office. So for the next 4 episodes, I'll be joined by Carol Saller, a longtime manuscript editor at the University of Chicago Press, who now inhabits more of a marketing role at the Manual as editor of its online Q&A and the Chicago Manual of Style's Shop Talk blog. Also joining me is Becky Brasington Clark, who heads up the Library of Congress Publishing Office as its director of publishing. In this first episode, our guests and I start off with a primer on the Publishing Office's mission and how the Chicago Manual of Style goes through an update. Okay, I imagine that our listeners are generally aware of both of your organizations, the University of Chicago Press, Carol, and the Library of Congress, Becky. But what they might not be familiar with, for example, is the Publishing Office within the Library of Congress. So would you mind taking a moment, Becky, to explain the mission of the Publishing Office and how it fits into the larger mission of the Library of Congress, and maybe a bit about what you do there as the head of the Publishing Office?
Sure. Well, the Library of Congress Publishing Office exists to create books and related products that showcase the collections of the library. In that regard, our work helps the library fulfill its mission to inform, inspire, and engage the public. Mm-hmm. And we do that by bringing the treasures of the collections to readers wherever they are. And so in developing these projects, our goal is not really merely just to show you collection items such as posters, prints, manuscripts. What we want to do is demonstrate the relevance of those items in space and time. We want readers to know why they're important, what purpose they served, and how they illuminate aspects of American history and culture. Every item has its own story. Our challenge is really to bring them together to illustrate their connection to America's story. So projects sometimes originate with our own small editorial team, but they often come from subject specialists and curators within the library, as well as external scholars during research. Our 5-person editorial team does amazing work. They consult with experts and scholars. They do research in the vaults, the reading rooms, and the stacks. And they're really gifted storytellers covering not only the who, what, why, and where, but the all-important who cares. Mm-hmm. And once we've selected a topic to pursue, we invest a lot of time in developing concepts and manuscripts. We do a lot of developmental editing. We find artwork. We clear permissions. We get high-resolution images. We write credit lines and captions. In that regard, we operate much like a book packager.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about, you mentioned the topic selection process and sort of the various individuals and groups that are involved with that. How do you, keep track of that? Or are you developing sort of an editorial calendar around that? Or especially from the outside, ideas that come in from outside of the publishing office itself, are those just coming in over the transom, or are you actively soliciting those? How does that work?
It's a little bit of both. We do actively solicit and commission new projects, but we also want to be open to the work that's being done in the collections because by outside scholars or by our own employees for that matter, because that can illuminate something that deserves to be more broadly disseminated that we may not have thought of. In terms of developing an editorial calendar, it's a little bit difficult. But because we're acting a little bit as an author ourselves, we are really trying to get the project as fully developed as it can be before we're taking it out to the world of publishing and getting it scheduled. So, some of our projects take years to develop. And what we want to make sure we're doing is having them fully developed before anyone's actually cataloging them or announcing them.
And then do you have, as those projects are being developed, are you securing, buy-in or interest from publishing partners as that process is going, or do you wait until it's all complete and then sort of hit the market?
We look for really a sweet spot when we know largely what the shape of a project's going to be, what our approach to the subject matter is going to be. When we can talk about it and give an elevator pitch, then we're going to do really what any good literary agent is going to do, which is we're going to create a pitch email and then a fully illustrated proposal. Saying, outlining what it is we're going to do with the subject matter, and what our approach is, sort of what our thesis is, if you will.
Right. Okay. I think Becky will get a little bit more into sort of the outcomes of those projects a little bit later.
Okay.
But Carol, I wanted to jump over to you and talk a little bit about what you're doing. For a long time, you served as the manuscript editor for the University of Chicago Press, and you currently edit the online Q&A for the manual as well as the CMOS Shop Talk blog. Could you talk a little bit about your evolution from copy editor to editor of these two very popular sections of the CMOS website? Do you have a bit of background on how these sections got started? And then finally, with the Q&A, did it have to do with the volume of questions you were seeing come into like a general email box?
Well, the Q&A did come about because we were getting a lot of questions. But that was actually more than 20 years ago, in 97, in the days before the Manual of Style was online. It had a web page, but that was all. And in those days, people wrote letters or phoned us with their style questions. And the manuscript editors, there are 15 of us, took turns answering them. But we all considered it a bit of an imposition, so we decided to post some FAQs on the web page. And people liked it, so we kept doing it. And in fact, there are now nearly 37,000 people who've signed up to get an email alert each month when the new Q&A is posted. As for the blog, the Shop Talk blog got started a few years ago when I moved out of the editorial department and into communications. And although the manual has brilliant marketers, it wouldn't really be possible for any of them to write or copy edit content that drills down so deeply into CMOS and Chicago style. It's just not what they were trained to do or what they want to do. So it was a new idea to have a CMOS expert on the communications team who could write the blog content and, for the most part, self-edit.
Support for this podcast comes from the University of Chicago Press and the 17th edition of the Chicago Manual of Style, All the Rules for Writing, referenced by generations of writers, editors, professionals, and college students. Available at bookstores everywhere. The Chicago Manual of Style is also online. Annual subscriptions are available to individuals and small user groups, as well as to academic, private, and public libraries. Free trial subscriptions are available. Learn more about the ways you can bring the Chicago Manual of Style to your library by visiting www.chicagomanualofstyle.org. That's www.chicagomanualofstyle.org. Listeners can save 25% on a print copy of the manual by using promo code CHOICEPOD25. That's CHOICEPOD, the number 25, at checkout. I imagine that extends fairly well out to social media as well. I mean, does CMOS have a strong presence out there as well?
Well, strong, yes, I think so. I think you'd characterize it as strong. We have quite a few followers on Facebook and Twitter, but we don't post things relentlessly. We feel that we don't engage politically. We don't put a lot of personality into it. It's more of a service. We announce new blog posts, and we tweet out little pieces of advice from the manual or Turabian, and so we're not very content heavy. We don't try to be controversial or really engage. We don't answer questions over social media.
Right. Yeah, I think that could get out of hand pretty quickly.
So we'd be right back where we started.
Yeah.
5 years ago.
Right. Do you have a file? I mean, do you keep a file of all the old letters that you used to get, or is that archived somewhere?
Yes. I have thousands and thousands and thousands of emails. I don't know if anyone has the physical letters that we received.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah, I imagine all of that interaction with the folks who are sending you questions one way or the other is potentially, I guess, one way that the editors at CMOS can begin to decide what should go into a new edition. Is that the case? And how does the team behind the manual work on updating it? And can you, as you talk about that, if you could describe the structure of the team, that could be kind of interesting too. And a little bit behind what's involved in, determining the updates and tracking the discourse in the community and re-examining previous guidance and timing of a new edition. Those are a lot of questions, but, any insight you can provide into sort of that, the sort of behind the scenes look at how the manual, the process of updating it would be fascinating.
Okay. Well, yes, the queries to the Q&A certainly do contribute to our thinking about the next edition, although it's a relatively small number that cause us to question something. Most of them are easily answered.
Right.
But there are lots of other ways that passages in the manual get flagged for updating. We pay attention to social media, we follow language blogs, and we have Google alerts set on all kinds of topics. We go to editing conferences, we check out new books on language, and we look at other grammar and style guides. And of course, when we actually start work on a new edition, it's the job of the principal reviser, which was Russell Harper for the last two editions. It's his job to work through every section of the manual and research what might have changed in order to write a draft that then goes to an in-house task force, as well as to expert readers in various fields out of house. The timing of a new edition is tricky. These days, it's primarily driven by developments in publishing technology, which changes much more quickly and drastically than anything that would motivate a change in, say, citation styles.
Right.
A big part of CMOS consists of detailed advice for all stages of publishing, from editing to permissions to typesetting. So when something new comes along, for instance, when it became possible to edit a PDF document on screen with tools within the document, the manual has to come up with advice on best practices. In fact, even the updates in the citation chapters are mostly technology related now. We don't really make many changes to styles that are already in the book. It's just that we have to add new advice and new examples for citing new kinds of electronic sources that literally didn't exist in the previous edition. It's hard to believe, but the words tweet and Twitter didn't even appear in the 16th edition, which came out in 2010.
That's interesting. Yeah, everything happened so quickly. You mentioned the task force. I just had a quick follow-up on that. Are these folks who are dedicated exclusively on the manual, or are they also sort of University of Chicago Press editors who have other responsibilities?
That's right. There's no dedicated team. Because the manual only comes out every 7 to 10 years, there just isn't enough work in between. In those, there are 3 or 4 years in between when nothing is happening except for what I'm doing, which is saving things into a file, and Russell does that as well. And so the people on the task force, there are about 20. They come from all over the press. They come from books, they come from journals, IT, marketing, permissions. There's just a representative of every aspect. And the outside advisory committee is mostly professors from all over the United States in different fields. Certainly there's no one in-house who, for instance, would really be able to vet the mathematics chapter. A lot of the foreign language advice is farmed out to expert linguists and things like that.
Right. That makes sense. So then you mentioned the 6 or 7 year intervals between new editions, and and just right after we've talked about how quickly technology changes things and sets up new opportunities. I mean, it kind of begs the question of why the manual isn't updated between editions, particularly online. Why wait for that length of time to come out with a new edition?
Well, there are several reasons we don't make changes between editions, even online. For one thing, lots of people using CMOS are working in teams and often on projects that take several years, and they all want to be on the same page.
Right.
It's important to them that the online edition be exactly the same as the printed one, so we don't want to update only one of them. Especially book publishers value the stability of a reference work that stays put for a while. What's more,
I would, if I could just add to that, I think it's really important that the Chicago Manual of Style is not constantly updated every time a new publishing whim comes along. We've seen so many things that come along, and it's the hot new thing in publishing, and everybody jumps on the bandwagon for a while, and then 6 months go by and it's gone. And if you put that into the Manual of Style, it's sort of, it's, I think that the manual is sort of a record of legitimate publishing or legitimization in publishing, and you don't want to give that stamp of authority to something that's not going to be around in a year.
Well, that's right. And what's more, we're aware that there's a lot of upheaval when a new edition appears. Many businesses and corporations base their in-house styles on Chicago, and there are lots of products out there like editing software or citation software that has to be overhauled every time CMOS updates. Dissertation departments at universities often require Chicago style, and academic journals might require it. So the most we do between editions is to correct typos or minor inconsistencies or factual errors. Every time the warehouse runs low on copies of the hardcover book and we have to do another print run, we take the opportunity to correct anything we've found. And of course, we make the same changes online, but we don't change the rules.
You just heard from Carol Saller and Becky Brasington Clark. This concludes the first of our 4-part series on the Chicago Manual of Style and the Library of Congress Publishing Office. This episode was brought to you by the University of Chicago Press. Be sure to join us for the next episode, where we'll talk more about how style can be a reflection of a cultural moment in time, the politics of copy editing, and how maintaining flexibility as a copy editor can actually be a virtue.
First of all, it's natural for people to want rules. It's how we're brought up, not just for learning grammar, but for learning all kinds of things. Rules make things simple for learning. But when it comes to speaking and writing, rules eventually get in the way of sophistication and nuance.
Find all of the episodes of The Authority File on your favorite podcast app or on our website, choice360.org. Just click on the Librarianship dropdown. On choice360.org, you'll also find information on Choice's entire product platform, including Choice Reviews, CC Advisor, Choice webinars, resources for college libraries, our white papers, and a whole lot more. A great way to keep up with the Authority File is to join the Choice Authority File Facebook group, which you can access via the Choice Reviews Facebook page. As a member of the group, you can give us feedback, suggest podcast participants, chat with other listeners, and submit new topic ideas. Sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and production duties are courtesy of Choice's digital media specialist, Mark Dirks. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.